It all started many years ago when the gospel world felt like one big family. At the center of it was Bishop J. Drew Sheard, a man everyone looked up to. He was not just a pastor, he was a symbol of strength, a voice that carried deep into the hearts of those who came to hear him. You won't believe this, but he was never just another preacher. Let me tell you, this was how it began. He came from a long line of spiritual giants, and from the moment he stepped into the church, it felt like destiny had chosen him. Bishop Sheard had a warmth about him that drew people closer. He came from Detroit, and the church he served felt like a second home to many. As a younger man, he watched his father, Bishop John Henry Sheard, lead with a kind of grace and power that shaped an entire generation. And when the time came for him to step into those big shoes, he embraced it fully. But here's the shocking part. No one could have guessed just how heavy the weight of that role would become. He rose quickly. He was sharp in his sermons, strong in his leadership, and deeply rooted in prayer. The Church of God in Christ, or COGIC, as everyone called it, soon placed its biggest trust in him. By 2021, he was elected as the presiding bishop of the denomination, making him one of the most important spiritual leaders in the world. This is where it gets interesting. For many, he was more than a bishop. He was a symbol of honor and belonging, a bridge between old traditions and a new era for the church. But what makes this story different? It's that behind the strong voice and smiling face, Bishop Sheard was carrying a burden that no one saw. The pandemic shook churches everywhere. Suddenly, the pews were empty, offerings were low, and tensions started to rise within the leadership. What was supposed to be a new chapter of glory for him became a test he was never prepared for. Let me tell you, as those pressures grew, whispers started to spread behind closed doors. The craziest part was that these whispers weren't about outsiders. They came from within the church, from people he trusted. Rumors of tensions with other bishops, questions about how money was being handled, and quiet doubts about whether he was strong enough for the role began to circulate. Then came the moments when the cracks started to show publicly. People noticed that he looked tired when he spoke. His voice, which was once deep and commanding, started to carry a hint of strain. Even the strong shepherd can grow weary, and soon it became obvious that the weight he was carrying was too much for one man. But here is the shocking part. What came next shook the entire gospel community and changed the way people looked at spiritual leaders forever. As the pressure grew, the walls started closing in on Bishop Sheard. What no one knew was that behind the strong sermons and confident voice, he was dealing with heartbreak that felt too big to carry. Let me tell you, this was how it started. First came the loss of his father, Bishop John Henry Sheard. To the world, it was a moment of honor and remembrance, but for him, it felt like the ground had been pulled from under his feet. His father was more than a parent. He was his guide, his strength, and the one person who truly understood the weight of carrying the Sheard name. This is where it gets interesting. At a time when he needed space to grieve, the demands of leading one of the biggest church organizations in the world only grew louder. The pandemic changed everything. Suddenly, churches weren't as full, offerings dried up, and leaders started questioning every decision. What makes this story different? It's that these questions weren't coming from strangers. They came from within, from people he trusted deeply. The craziest part was that friends he had prayed with for years started whispering behind his back. They said he was too soft, too focused on connections with the gospel music world. Others felt he was too distracted, too tired to carry the torch anymore. But here is the shocking part. Bishop Sheard tried to stay strong. He tried to pray harder, work longer, and carry the burdens of both a global church and a broken heart. Yet, behind the walls of his office and in the quiet of his home, he felt more alone than ever. Even the shepherd can get lost, and soon he began to wonder if this was worth it anymore. What no one saw coming was how quickly the tensions would boil over. In late 2022, during a routine service, a moment happened that no one will ever forget. Let me tell you, this was how the world learned the truth. As he stood in the pulpit, voice shaking, he stopped preaching. The room fell silent. And then he spoke the words that shook the room. Even the shepherd can get lost. In that moment, it felt like time stopped. The strong, confident bishop that people admired revealed a side that no one had ever seen. This was where it gets interesting, because that moment became more than a crack in the surface. It became the breaking point that would change him and the church forever. That night, after he spoke those words, everything changed. Let me tell you, this is where the story takes a darker turn. The video of that moment went viral, and soon the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They became conversations in every corner of the church. People wondered, was Bishop Sheard okay? Was he too tired, too broken to lead? The craziest part was that those questions weren't just coming from strangers online. They came from within the church itself, from people he had trusted for years. Behind closed doors, tensions boiled over. Some leaders felt he was too focused on his family and friends in the gospel music world. Others felt he was too soft, too gentle for the tough role of presiding bishop. What makes this story different? The betrayal came from those he had prayed with, traveled with, and broken bread with. People he had called brothers started turning into critics. Leaked documents, whispered phone calls, and quiet meetings became the weapons used to question his ability to lead. But here's the shocking part. Bishop Sheard never spoke out, not once. He refused to call out names, refused to point fingers. Even when anonymous letters circulated claiming he was unfit, he responded with silence. Let me tell you, this was how a man of strength started to break down piece by piece. It wasn't long before the weight became too much. In early 2023, with the whole world watching, Bishop Sheard stepped into the pulpit one Sunday morning and announced that he was stepping down temporarily. This is where it gets interesting. It wasn't because of scandal or betrayal. It was because he felt drained, because he felt that no one can lead when running on empty. Even shepherds need healing. Even bishops bleed, he said. And with those words, he shook the very foundation of the church he had dedicated his life to. Let me tell you, that moment felt like an earthquake in the gospel world. The room fell silent, and in that silence, every person felt the sting of a reality no one wanted to acknowledge. After that day, many wondered if Bishop Sheard would ever come back. Let me tell you, this is where the story takes its biggest twist. At a time when everyone expected him to fight for his position or walk away defeated, he chose a different path. The craziest part was that he didn't try to save his title or prove himself to those who doubted him. Instead, he focused on finding peace. Destiny took an unexpected turn when Bishop Sheard stepped out of the spotlight and started doing something no one saw coming. While the church was whispering, he was quietly building a space for leaders like himself, a space where pain could be shared, where wounds could be treated, and where broken hearts could be healed. What makes this story different? It's that he refused to become bitter. Instead, he used the betrayal and heartbreak to create a new chapter for himself and others. He began organizing small private gatherings with pastors and church leaders across the country, not for preaching, not for accolades, but for one thing, for healing. Here is the shocking part. When offered the chance to return to the top of the church, he said no. Let me tell you, that was a moment no one expected. He announced that God had shown him a new assignment, one that was less about position and more about people. It was the start of a new mission, a space for exhausted leaders, for wounded pastors, for families broken by the pressures of ministry. Bishop Sheard was no longer chasing a title. He was chasing a purpose. Today, when people speak of Bishop J. Drew Sheard, they don't just speak of the bishop. They speak of a man who refused to stay down when the world tried to bury him. They speak of a man who gave everything for the church, and when the church gave up on him, he found a way to give back to it. Let me tell you, this is how a story of betrayal became a story of redemption. This is how a broken man became a beacon of hope for countless others. And that, in the end, is the lesson we can all carry with us, that even in the darkest moments when betrayal feels like the end, a new chapter can always be written.